Welcome everyone. Leave here in the comments where you are talking about. And now, let's get started. Lake Tahoe's crystal clear waters have always held secrets, but I never expected to find this. 15 years of professional diving, including military operations, hadn't prepared me for what lurked in those depths. The initial reports seemed routine. Unusual light formations at depths beyond recreational diving limits. As a videographer specializing in deep water phenomena, I documented similar occurrences before. But Tahoe was different. The lights weren't reflecting off anything. They were watching me. My Winnebago Revel made the perfect mobile command center, parked in a secluded spot near Cave Rock. The location was ideal. Close enough to launch my diving operations, far enough from tourists to work undisturbed. I'd modified the RV with cutting-edge video editing equipment, sonar displays, and a hyperbaric oxygen system for emergency decompression. Everything I needed to document whatever was creating those mysterious light patterns. I should have brought more backup systems. The first dive was textbook perfect. Crystal clear visibility extended far deeper than even for Tahoe's famously clear waters. My cameras captured the standard footage: geological formations, native fish species, the gradual transition into darkness. But when I reviewed the footage in my RV that evening, something was wrong. The video showed structures that hadn't been there during the dive, geometric patterns that seemed to shift between frames. The sonar readings made no sense. They showed massive objects moving at depths where the pressure should have crushed anything living. The formations appeared to change position between sweeps, following patterns that suggested intelligence rather than random drift. The lake floor topology didn't match any existing surveys, as if the bottom itself was being constantly reshaped. My military training screamed at me to report it. But to whom that first night in the RV, I noticed the lake's surface beginning to change. The usually calm waters developed patterns that didn't match the wind direction. Ripples formed perfect geometric shapes, like something vast was writing messages in a language too large to read. My cameras captured it all. Though each playback showed slightly different patterns, the water wasn't just moving, it was trying to communicate. The second day's dive revealed more anomalies. My underwater cameras began picking up light frequencies that shouldn't exist at those depths. Bioluminescence was common in deep water, but this was different. Structured patterns of light that moved with deliberate purpose, forming and reforming into complex geometries that hurt my eyes to look at. The footage showed even more when reviewed. Patterns within patterns that seemed to respond to viewing. My hydrophones picked up the first sounds that morning, a low, rhythmic pulsing that penetrated the hull of my RV even when I wasn't in the... It matched nothing in my database of underwater acoustics. Neither natural nor man-made. The frequency seemed to modulate itself, adapting to match the resonant frequency of whatever was listening. Local wildlife began acting strangely, with fish and birds moving in unnatural synchronization. The Washoe elders had warned about Cave Rock, about the spirits that lived in the lake's depths. I'd dismissed their concerns as traditional caution about dangerous waters. Now, reviewing my footage, I understood their warnings differently. The lights I'd captured weren't reflecting off the rock formations. They were emerging from them, using the ancient stones as doorways between their world and ours. The water itself began to change. Chemical analysis showed impossible compositions, molecular structures that shouldn't be stable. The clarity that made Tahoe famous had become something else. The water wasn't just clear. It was alive with purpose. My cameras caught glimpses of vast shapes moving through it, their forms suggesting dimensions beyond normal space. The lake had become a lens, focusing something ancient. My RV system started detecting the changes that evening. The fresh water tank showed traces of the same impossible compounds I'd found in the lake. The metal hull developed patterns that matched the geometric forms I'd filmed underwater. Even the air inside began to feel different, heavier with moisture that moved in ways water shouldn't. Something was using my equipment, my presence, to extend its influence beyond the lake. The footage began changing itself. Each time I reviewed a dive recording, new details emerged, structures that hadn't been there before, movements at the edge of frames, lights that seemed to respond to being watched. The video files corrupted in specific patterns, transforming random data into more of those geometric shapes. My editing software couldn't distinguish between digital artifacts and actual footage anymore. The hydrophone recordings revealed a pattern I should have noticed earlier. The sounds weren't just random frequencies. They were evolving, becoming more complex with each playback. Spectral analysis showed impossible harmonics. frequencies that seemed to exist in mathematical spaces beyond normal acoustics. The sounds were teaching themselves how to be heard, using my equipment to translate their message. My sonar display became a window into something impossible. The lake bottom wasn't just changing, it was organizing itself into vast patterns that matched ancient Washoe cave paint. The depth readings fluctuated wildly, showing bottomless chasms that appeared and disappeared between sweeps. The technology I trusted for years now showed me things I couldn't accept but couldn't deny. The lake was awake, and it was aware of being observed. The cameras caught the first physical manifestation that night. I'd set up external monitors to watch the lake surface. Standard security practice for solo operations. The footage shows the water rising against gravity, forming columns that moved with deliberate purpose. But the water wasn't just moving. It was taking shapes that water shouldn't hold, geometric forms that ignored physics. The lake was learning to reach beyond its boundaries. My RV became the focus of its attention. The metal walls developed condensation that moved against gravity, forming those same geometric patterns I'd seen in the depths. The electronic systems began picking up signals that came from everywhere and nowhere. Data streams that corrupted themselves into messages I couldn't read, but couldn't stop trying to understand. Every piece of technology I'd brought had become a portal for something that lived in frequencies I wasn't meant to perceive. The distance between water and air began to blur. My RV's interior developed zones where moisture behaved impossibly, floating in geometric patterns that matched the deep formation. The walls would weep water that moved with purpose, forming and reforming those same symbols I'd captured in the depths. The barrier between inside and outside was dissolving, and something was flowing through the gaps. Everything that could hold water became a potential gateway. My diving equipment started changing independently. The regulators developed new chambers that shouldn't exist. The gauges showed readings in scales I'd never seen. The wetsuits became slick with something that wasn't quite water, a fluid that seemed to respond to thought and intent. Even the air tanks produced mixtures that registered as impossible on my analyzers. My gear wasn't just failing. It was being redesigned by something that understood pressure and breathing in ways I couldn't comprehend. The video footage revealed the true extent of the transformation. Each dive had taken me deeper into something's territory, not just physically, but dimensionally. The cameras had captured a gradual shift in the nature of space itself. Areas where water and light behaved according to laws that didn't exist on the surface. My presence had attracted attention from something that saw our reality as a shallow pool. It could finally reach beyond. The signals my equipment received became stronger, more focused. The sonar didn't just show movement anymore. It showed intent. Vast patterns of coordination that suggested a single consciousness spread throughout the lake's volume. The hydrophones picked up frequencies that made my professional equipment seem primitive, sounds that carried information in ways human senses couldn't process. Something ancient was teaching itself our technology, using my devices to bridge a gap. That night, the lake's surface began to change fundamentally. The water developed textures that water shouldn't have, qualities that suggested it was becoming something else entirely. My cameras caught the transformation in terrible detail. Liquid that moved like living crystal, forming structures that reached toward my RV with deliberate purpose. The barrier between water and air, between their world and ours, was dissolving around my vehicle. This warning goes against everything I was taught about scientific documentation. The footage I captured needs to be destroyed. The data corrupted beyond recovery. Every video file, every audio recording, every sonar reading has become a portal for something that understands technology better than its creators. They're using our own tools to reach through, to transform our world into something that can sustain their presence. The lake was their first doorway. My equipment gave them more. I abandoned my RV at Cave Rock, but not before I saw it changing. The metal hull developed patterns like ancient scales. The windows became membranes that rippled with impossible colors. The electronics didn't just fail, they evolved, displaying information in formats human minds weren't meant to process. Everything that could conduct electricity or hold water became part of their network. My mobile base had become their first outpost on land, the Washoe people. Their legends about Cave Rock weren't just stories about dangerous waters. They were warnings about boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. The lake's famous clarity isn't natural. It's a symptom of something ancient gradually transforming the water into a medium it can exist in. My cameras didn't just document this process. They accelerated it, gave it new ways to spread. Now it's using digital networks like it used water, flowing through data like current. Don't come to Lake Tahoe with technology. Don't bring cameras, phones, anything that can record or transmit. They're learning to use our devices as conduits, spreading through networks like they once spread through water. The patterns appear in video files first, geometric shapes that shouldn't exist, frequencies that change how water behaves. Once you see them, they've already begun using your technology to reach through. The lake is just their first portal. This is my last message. Recorded on paper because anything electronic near me becomes their channel now. The lake's transformation is accelerating. The water doesn't just move wrong. It thinks. It reaches. It transforms everything. It touches into something that can sustain their presence. My footage is out there somewhere, corrupted with their patterns, spreading through digital networks like spores. If you see geometric shapes in water, if liquid starts moving against gravity, if your devices show patterns you can't quite understand, destroy them. But by then, you'll already be part of their network, another conduit for something that's finally learning to swim beyond the lake's depths. As a volcanologist, I should have known better than to dismiss the initial readings. 20 years of studying volcanic lakes hadn't prepared me for what lurked in Crater Lake's depths. The thermal scans showed impossible heat patterns, energy signatures that defied geological understanding. Claire thought her marine biology background could help explain the anomalies. Tyler was just excited to explore America's deepest lake. We had no idea we were waking something ancient. Our Tiffin Wayfarer made the perfect mobile research station, parked near the rim with a clear view of the caldera. The location was ideal for my thermal imaging equipment, while Claire could easily collect water samples. Tyler set up his own little research station, eager to help with his first real scientific expedition. The Klamath tribal elders warned us about disturbing the lake's depths. We should have listened to their ancient wisdom. The first warning signs appeared in Tyler's dreams. He would wake up speaking words none of us understood, drawing images of creatures he couldn't have known about. Claire recognized elements from Klamath mythology, beings they said lived in the lake before the mountain exploded. We dismissed it as an active imagination sparked by the dramatic setting. The instruments told a different story. My thermal readings made no sense. The heat wasn't coming from volcanic activity. It moved with purpose, following patterns that suggested intelligence. Deep beneath the surface, something was generating energy in ways that violated thermodynamics. The lake wasn't just warm. It was being warmed, deliberately and systematically. Each scan showed the patterns growing more complex. More organized, Claire's water samples revealed impossible changes in the lake's chemistry. The crystal clear water was transforming at a molecular level, developing properties that shouldn't exist in nature. The changes followed the heat patterns, creating conditions that matched Tyler's drawings. Environments that could sustain life forms we thought were just legends. Something was preparing the lake for their return. Tyler's connection to the lake grew stronger each. His dreams became more vivid, filled with visions of the ancient eruption that formed the caldera. But he wasn't seeing it as a natural disaster. In his dreams, the explosion was deliberate. A desperate attempt to trap something that lived in the mountain's heart. The heat signatures I was tracking weren't from geological processes. They were from something trying to break free. Claire's research revealed disturbing patterns in the lake's ecosystem. Species were changing, adapting to the new chemical conditions in ways that shouldn't be possible. The fish showed signs of rapid evolution, developing features that matched fossilized remains from long before the eruption. The lake wasn't just changing, it was reverting, returning to what it had been before the mountain exploded. The Klamath elders shared more of their oral history with. They spoke of a time before the mountain became a lake, when their ancestors sealed something in the volcano's heart. The eruption wasn't natural. It was a last resort, using the mountain's own power to imprison an entity that threatened both our worlds. The heat we were detecting was its attempt to finish waking up. Our instruments began picking up signals from the lake's deepest points. Sonar revealed structures that shouldn't exist, geometric formations too regular to be natural. The thermal imaging showed these structures were the source of the heat. Ancient machines awakening after millennia of sleep. Tyler's drawings had shown these same patterns weeks before we detected them. The lake's famous clarity started to change. The blue water developed patches of luminescence that moved with purpose, following the heat patterns we'd been tracking. At night, lights would dance beneath the surface, forming symbols that matched Tyler's drawings. Our son wasn't just dreaming about the past. He was connecting with something that had finally found a way to communicate. The changes in Tyler became more pronounced. he would sleepwalk at night, drawn to the lake's edge, speaking in that ancient language with perfect fluency. His drawings grew more detailed, showing not just creatures but entire cities that once existed within the mountain. The tribal elders recognized the structures. They matched ruins found deep in lava tubes, remnants of a civilization that vanished when the volcano erupted. Our RV's instruments detected increasing anomalies. The temperature inside would fluctuate wildly, matching patterns in the lake. Electronic equipment began malfunctioning, displaying readings and symbols that looked like Tyler's drawings. The metal walls hummed with energy that resonated at the same frequency as the deep lake structures. Our mobile laboratory had become an antenna for something trying to broadcast from the depths. Claire's latest samples showed the lake water was now completely altered. The molecular structure had changed to match chemical compositions found in Tyler's drawings, combinations that could sustain life forms we'd thought impossible. The lake wasn't just reverting. It was being transformed into an environment that could once again support the beings that had been trapped there. The prison was becoming a nursery. The heat patterns formed a clear countdown. Each pulse of energy followed a precise mathematical sequence, building towards something we couldn't comprehend. Tyler understood it, though. In his altered state, he could read the thermal signatures like a language. He said they were coordinates. Instructions for reassembling something that had been scattered by the ancient eruption. The tribal elders evacuated the area, recognizing signs from their oldest stories. They knew what was coming. Their ancestors had seen it before, had sacrificed an entire mountain to stop it. But this time the entity was more prepared. It had spent millennia learning from its prison, understanding the forces that had trapped it. Now it was using that knowledge to ensure its resurrection would be complete. The lake began to remember its original form. The water level fluctuated impossibly, revealing glimpses of structures that shouldn't have survived the eruption. My instruments showed the heat was reshaping reality itself, using volcanic energy to reconstruct what had been destroyed. Through Tyler's altered consciousness, we could see what the lake was becoming, a window into what it had been before. Claire's biometric scans revealed the true extent of Tyler's connection. His brain patterns matched frequencies emanating from the deep lake structures, suggesting direct communication with whatever was awakening. Our son had become a conduit, his dreams a bridge between our world and theirs. The entity wasn't just influencing him, it was teaching him to understand its reality. The ancient machines beneath the lake activated fully. Our instruments recorded energy signatures that defied physics, power sources that had waited millennia to be rediscovered. The heat patterns weren't random, they were a code, a program for reconstructing something vast. Each pulse brought more of the ancient world back into phase with our reality. Tyler's drawings became blueprints for what was emerging. The creatures weren't just legends. They were memories preserved in the lake's molecular structure, waiting to be reassembled. The heat was providing energy for their reconstruction, using the lake's transformed chemistry to rebuild bodies that could exist in our world. Our research had given them the final keys they needed. Our RAV became a focal point for the lake's energy. The walls rippled with heat distortions, windows showing glimpses of what the caldera had looked like before the eruption. Through Tyler's eyes, we could see the truth. The lake wasn't just a volcanic crater. It was a door, and something vast was about to step through it. This warning comes at a cost. Every time I share these details, Tyler's connection grows stronger. The entity is still there in Crater Lake, using the heat and transformed water to rebuild its world. Our son understands their language now, can see the structures hidden beneath the surface. The tribal elders say he's become a bridge, a human anchor for something that never should have been disturbed. The lake continues to change. The famous blue water now pulses with inner light, carrying energy patterns that match the ancient machines. Claire's final samples showed the transformation is spreading through underground springs, carrying the altered chemistry to other water sources. The entity isn't content to reclaim just the lake. It wants to reconstruct its entire world. Stay away from Crater Lake. Don't study the thermal anomalies or collect water samples. Every measurement, every analysis, every attempt to understand gives them more power to rebuild. The heat signatures are a language, the water chemistry a blueprint. They're using our scientific instruments to perfect their reconstruction, turning our understanding against us. Tyler speaks to them in dreams now, learns more of their secrets each night. The tribal elders have taken him under their protection, teaching him to control his connection to the lake. They say he's part of both worlds now, a guardian who can help maintain the balance. But we can see the truth in his. Part of him belongs to them now, transformed like the lake itself. I leave this final warning. If you visit Crater Lake, Stay away from the water. Don't measure the heat or study the changes. If you see lights moving in the depths, if the water seems to call to you, if your dreams fill with visions of ancient cities, run. The entity is still awakening, using human curiosity to complete its resurrection. Our son was the first to hear its call, but he won't be the last. Some things should stay sealed in Earth's depths. Some doors should remain closed. 15 years of wildlife photography hadn't prepared me for what I found in Black Hills. I documented animal behavior across 6 continents, but nothing like this. The initial reports seemed odd but explainable. Nocturnal animals appearing during day, prey animals ignoring predators, entire species abandoning established territories. As a professional, I thought I could explain it. I was wrong. Some things aren't meant to be documented. My RAM ProMaster was perfect for this assignment. Modified with state-of-the-art camera systems and a mobile editing studio, I'd chosen a secluded spot near Jewel Cave, ideal for monitoring wildlife movement. The location had everything I needed: clear lines of sight, multiple animal trails converging nearby, and enough isolation to work undisturbed. I should have wondered why no other photographers had claimed such a perfect spot. The first anomalies appeared in my evening photographs. The deer were moving in geometric patterns, forming perfect circles and lines that couldn't be natural. My motion-activated cameras caught elk and coyotes traveling together, not as predator and prey, but as if coordinated. When I reviewed the footage, their eyes reflected light in synchronized patterns, like binary code blinking in the darkness. Nature doesn't work that way. The animal sounds changed at night. My directional microphones picked up vocalizations that didn't match any known species. Wolves howled in perfect harmonics, creating frequencies that made my recording equipment malfunction. Birds sang at night in patterns that resembled mathematical sequences. The forest was trying to communicate something, using its inhabitants as a living transmission system. The caves seemed to be the focus of it all. Every trail camera showed the same thing: animals of all species moving toward the cave entrances at night, forming orderly lines that defied natural behavior. My thermal imaging caught heat signatures deep in the cave mouths, patterns that pulsed like heartbeats but spread across impossible distances. Something was coordinating this behavior, using the wildlife as its sensors. The morning brought more disturbing discoveries. My cameras had captured miles of animal tracks, all moving in perfect spirals toward the caves. Species that should have been hibernating had emerged, joining the procession. The ground itself was marked with their passing, trails worn so deep they resembled ancient carvings. When I tried to document the patterns, my cameras began malfunctioning, showing images that seemed to shift between frames. My ARV's electronic systems started picking up anomalies. The GPS showed impossible locations, as if the landscape was shifting around us. The radio caught fragments of sound that shouldn't have existed. Animal calls layered with something deeper, a bass frequency that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Every piece of equipment registered the change in its own way, translating an impossible signal into data. The local rangers had stopped responding to my calls. Their stations were empty, but my cameras caught glimpses of their trucks moving through the forest at night, following the same patterns as the wildlife. The few hikers I spotted moved with strange purpose, their gaits matching the rhythmic procession of the animals. The influence was spreading, turning every living thing into part of its growing pattern. My research into local history revealed disturbing parallels. Native American legends spoke of the caves as ancient doorways, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. They described times when the animals would gather, guided by something that lived in the depths of the earth. The stories warned of a consciousness that could reach out through living things. Using them as eyes and ears, I should have listened. The behavior spread to smaller creatures as night approached. Insects moved in perfect formations, creating living symbols on tree trunks and rocks. Birds arranged themselves in geometric patterns against the sky, their migrations forming mathematical constants. The entire ecosystem was being reorganized, every species becoming part of a vast living algorithm. My cameras captured it all, though each viewing showed subtle changes in the footage. The caves began emanating sound at sunset, not the natural echoes of wind or water, but a deep resonance that my equipment registered as both sound and electromagnetic radiation. The frequency matched the patterns I'd observed in animal behavior, suggesting a coordination beyond mere instinct. My directional microphones picked up harmonics that seemed to carry information. Using the natural acoustics of the caves as a vast broadcasting system, My wildlife cameras revealed a horrifying progression. The animals weren't just gathering, they were transforming. Subtle changes in movement and anatomy appeared in each new recording, as if something was gradually redesigning them from within. Skeletal structures shifted beneath skin. Eyes developed new reflective properties, and vocalizations carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. Nature itself was being rewritten according to some alien blueprint. The Arv's metal hull began resonating with the cave frequencies. The walls vibrated in patterns that matched the wildlife movements, turning my shelter into an antenna for something trying to communicate. My electronic equipment picked up signals that corrupted their own recordings, transforming data into new patterns that resembled the cave markings. Even my solar panels pulsed with energy that couldn't have come from the sun. Local wildlife gathered around my camp each night, forming concentric circles that slowly tightened. Their eyes reflected impossible colors, and their movements had become synchronized with the cave resonance. Through my cameras, I could see the changes more clearly. Their bodies were being optimized for some purpose I couldn't understand. They had become living sensors for something ancient that was finally ready to emerge. The transformation affected plants as well. Trees bent in patterns that defied natural growth, their branches forming symbols visible only from above. Fungi spread in geometric progressions, creating networks that pulsed with the cave frequencies. The entire forest was being converted into components of a vast organic computer, processing information for something that thought in patterns of living tissue. My cameras caught the moment it began. A massive surge of wildlife converging on the caves just before midnight. Every species moved in perfect synchronization, their bodies flowing like living mercury through forest. The cave entrances glowed with a light that didn't illuminate, radiating frequencies that made my equipment record impossibilities. The ancient doorways were opening, using the coordinated life around them as keys. The forest itself seemed to wake up. Trees swayed against the wind, their movements matching the rhythm emanating from the caves. The ground pulsed with seismic patterns that formed perfect mathematical sequences. My instruments recorded it all, though each playback showed something slightly different, as if the reality of the event was too complex for technology to capture consistently. The animals began changing more rapidly. My thermal cameras showed their body temperatures fluctuating in impossible patterns, matching the cave frequencies. Their anatomies shifted like living clay, optimizing themselves for some purpose that defied evolution. Through my lenses, I watched as nature's designs were rewritten by something that saw organic life as programmable matter. The cave resonance reached a crescendo that night. The frequencies penetrated everything: rock, wood, flesh, and metal. My equipment recorded sounds that shouldn't exist, electromagnetic patterns that resembled both code and DNA. Through the cameras, I watched as reality itself seemed to ripple around the cave entrances, distorting space in ways that hurt to observe. Something vast stirred in the depths. The assembled wildlife moved as one, their bodies forming living conductors for energy that flowed from the caves. My cameras caught glimpses of what emerged, a geometry of living matter that existed in more dimensions than our eyes could process. It had been waiting in the deep places, using the caves as incubators for its influence. Now it was ready to extend its patterns to the world above. This warning may be my last chance to prevent others from making my mistake. The footage I captured has been corrupted, transformed by the same force that reshaped the wildlife. Every time I review it, the images show something different, as if the recordings themselves are evolving. My equipment has become an extension of its influence, each playback spreading its patterns further into our technology. The caves are still active, but they're no longer just geological formations. They've become nodes in a vast network of living information, processing data through patterns of altered wildlife and vegetation. The animals continue to change, becoming more efficient conduits for something that thinks in systems of coordinated life. My cameras show them evolving daily, though each species retains just enough of its original form to avoid human notice. Don't bring cameras to Black Hills. Don't try to document the wildlife behavior or record the cave frequencies. Every piece of technology becomes part of its network, another sensor for an intelligence that's gradually extending its influence. The forest knows when it's being watched now, and it knows how to use our own devices to watch back. The boundaries between observer and observed have dissolved. The transformation is spreading beyond the forest. My last satellite uploads showed similar patterns emerging in wildlife across the region. Spreading like a living algorithm through natural systems, the caves were just the beginning. Now, every natural space has become a potential conduit for something that sees Earth's biosphere as a system to be reprogrammed. Our technology gave it the patterns it needed to extend its influence. I'm leaving this record as a final warning, written on paper because anything electronic near me becomes corrupt. If you see animals moving in perfect geometric patterns, if you notice wildlife gathering in impossible numbers, if you find your cameras showing images that change between viewings, run, delete your recordings, destroy your equipment. The pattern spreads through observation, and it's already learned how to use our need to document against us. The caves are breathing now, and every living thing has become part of their vast, awakening consciousness. No amount of geological training could have prepared me for what we found in Monument Valley. The initial seismic readings seemed impossible. Patterns too regular to be natural, too complex to be man-made. Diana thought her archaeological expertise could explain them, tied them to ancient Navajo stories about the rocks. We were both wrong. The stones weren't just monuments or geological formations. They were waiting, and our instruments woke them up. Our Airstream Atlas made the perfect mobile research station. Positioned with a clear view of the major formations, the location was ideal for my seismic equipment. While Diana could document the newly discovered pictograms, we had everything we needed: advanced geological sensors, high-resolution cameras, and enough supplies for a week. The Navajo elders warned us about setting up so close to the monoliths. We should have listened. The first anomalies appeared in my seismic data that evening. The vibrations formed patterns that resembled language more than geological activity. Diana noticed they matched the rhythm of certain Navajo chants, songs about stone guardians that watched over sacred lands. My instruments showed the signals originated deep within the monoliths themselves. But that was impossible. Solid rock doesn't generate its own frequencies. The local guides had stopped coming to our location after sunset. They said the shadows moved wrong around the stones, that the ancient ones were stirring. We dismissed it as superstition, but our cameras caught it. Shadows that stretched against the angle of the sun, shapes that suggested impossible scale. The monoliths were casting shadows that didn't match their size, as if something larger was trying to manifest. Diana's translation of the pictograms became more disturbing as she cross-referenced them with older Navajo texts. The symbols weren't just decorative or historical. They were warnings, descriptions of beings that slept in the stone, waiting for someone to speak their language again. Our seismic equipment had been sending signals in frequencies that matched their ancient patterns. We weren't just studying the monuments. We were calling them. The seismic patterns changed on the second day. What started as subtle vibrations became complex rhythms that my equipment could barely track. The frequencies matched no known geological phenomenon. They were too ordered, too intentional. Each monolith began emitting its own signature, creating harmonics that made the ground resonate beneath our RV. The stone wasn't just vibrating, it was communicating. Diana's research revealed a disturbing pattern in Navajo mythology. The stories spoke of massive beings that turned themselves to stone to wait for a signal, a specific frequency that would wake them. The pictograms weren't just warning about guardians, they were instructions for keeping them dormant. Every reading from my instruments matched the forbidden frequencies described in the ancient texts. We had accidentally created the exact conditions for their awakening. The transformations became visible at sunset. The monolith's surfaces began shifting, not like natural erosion, but like skin stretching over muscle. Our high-speed cameras caught microsecond changes in their structure, crystalline patterns reorganizing themselves into more complex formations. The stone wasn't just changing, it was remembering its original form. My geological analysis showed impossible alterations at the molecular level. Our RV systems started detecting magnetic anomalies that shouldn't exist in desert conditions. The electronics would surge and die in patterns matching the monolith's vibrations. Diana's camera caught glimpses of light emanating from the rock faces, not reflecting off them, but coming from within. The stones were generating their own energy, using our equipment as amplifiers for their awakening frequencies. The desert itself seemed to respond to the changes. Sand moved in geometric patterns around the monoliths, forming symbols that matched the ancient pictograms. The wind carried sounds that our audio equipment recorded as structured sequences. Too complex to be natural, too ancient to be human. The entire valley had become an instrument, playing a song of awakening that grew stronger with each passing hour. The night brought new horrors. Under infrared, we could see heat patterns within the monoliths that suggested impossible internal movement. The stone wasn't solid anymore. It flowed like thick liquid while maintaining its shape. As if something inside was testing its bonds, Our instruments recorded temperature fluctuations that formed the same patterns as the pictograms, but the readings changed every time we reviewed them. As if the data itself was alive, Diana's translations became more urgent as she decoded older layers of symbols. The pictograms told of beings that existed before the rock, entities that chose stone form as temporary shelter while they waited. The Navajo hadn't built monuments to their gods. They had found ways to keep the ancient ones sleeping. The warnings talked about frequencies that could break their stone prison, sounds that modern technology could accidentally recreate. The monoliths began moving at night, though our cameras could never catch them in motion. Each morning, their positions would be slightly different, the changes only visible when comparing time-lapse footage. They were arranging themselves in patterns that Diana recognized from the oldest pictograms, formations meant to channel and amplify energy. The valley was becoming a massive geometric machine. Powered by frequencies we had awakened, our equipment started capturing impossible data. Seismic readings showed voids inside the monoliths that couldn't exist, spaces that seemed to extend beyond the physical dimensions of the rocks. The thermal imaging revealed heat signatures that moved in patterns suggesting conscious thought. Everything we recorded showed the same truth. The stones weren't just stone anymore, they were becoming something else. The transformation accelerated after midnight. The monoliths' surfaces rippled like water. Though they remained solid to touch, our instruments detected energy patterns that matched no known source. Frequencies that seemed to exist in dimensions our equipment wasn't designed to measure. The Stone Guardians weren't just waking up. They were remembering what they were before they chose to sleep in rock form. The final stage began at sunset. The monoliths started emitting their own light, a deep red glow that pulsed in sync with the seismic patterns. Through our cameras, we could see the stone surface becoming translucent, revealing crystalline structures beneath that moved like living tissue. The Guardians were shedding their stone skin, emerging from a sleep that had lasted millennia. Our instruments recorded everything. Though each playback showed something slightly different, Diana's final translations came too late. The oldest symbols described beings that existed in geometric forms, entities that could fold space and matter like paper. They had chosen the simplest form, stone, to wait out the ages. But that was never their true shape. The frequencies from our equipment had reminded them of their original nature. Now they were remembering how to unfold themselves from three-dimensional space. The desert floor cracked in perfect geometric patterns, forming massive symbols that matched the pictograms. Sand rose in impossible columns, moving against gravity in shapes that hurt to look at. The monoliths weren't just individual entities. They were parts of something larger, components of a vast machine that was finally starting to move. Our cameras struggled to capture images that seemed to exist in more dimensions than light could properly show. The air itself began to change as the Stone Guardians awakened. Light bent in ways that defied physics, creating shadows that suggested impossible geometries. Our instruments detected frequencies that existed beyond normal space-time, vibrations that seemed to echo from dimensions we couldn't perceive. The very fabric of reality was being reshaped by beings that remembered when space had more directions to move in. Time behaved strangely near the awakening monoliths. Our video footage showed events happening both forward and backward. Sometimes simultaneously, the stone beings existed partially outside normal time flow. And as they woke, they pulled the surrounding reality with them. The border between past and present dissolved around them, showing glimpses of what they had been and what they would become. This warning comes with a price. Every time I share these details, I feel the frequencies returning, resonating through my bones. The monoliths are awake now, though they maintain their stone form when humans are watching. But our equipment caught their true nature, recorded the frequencies of their awakening. The data itself has become dangerous. Anyone who studies our readings too closely begins to perceive dimensions they weren't meant to see. The Navajo elders were right. Some things should remain sleeping. The Stone Guardians weren't meant to be understood by modern science. Our instruments gave them a way to remember themselves, to start unfolding from their stone sleep. The frequencies we recorded have spread through scientific networks, infecting other research stations. More monoliths are starting to vibrate across the desert, responding to the awakening call. Do not bring scientific equipment to Monument Valley. Don't try to measure the stones or record their frequencies. Every reading, every measurement, every attempt to understand them only hastens their complete awakening. They exist in geometries our minds cannot comprehend, and trying to quantify them only gives them more ways to emerge from their self-imposed stone prison. Some forms of knowledge are themselves a danger. The transformation continues, though few can perceive it yet. The monoliths are slowly remembering how to move through dimensions beyond our space-time. Each sunset reveals more of their true nature to those who know how to look. The desert is changing around them, reality reshaping itself to accommodate beings that were old. When the concept of space had different meanings, our instruments gave them the key to remember, and now they cannot forget. I leave this final warning. If you visit Monument Valley, stay away from the monoliths at sunset. Don't record them, don't measure them, don't try to understand their patterns. If you see shadows moving against the sun, if the stones seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them, if you feel frequencies that make your vision blur, run. The Stone Guardians are awake now, remembering what they were before they chose to sleep in rock form. They're unfolding themselves from our reality, and they're taking pieces of our dimension with them. "20 years of marine biology hadn't prepared me for what we found at Ruby Beach. The initial data suggested a simple anomaly, unusual fog patterns affecting local marine life. Laura thought her meteorological expertise could explain it, while Sam was just excited to photograph the moody coastline. We were all wrong. The fog wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It was a veil, and something was waiting behind it. We never should have looked beyond that veil. Our Winnebago Vista seemed perfect for the research trip, perched on the cliffs above Ruby Beach with clear views of the ocean and coastline. Laura set up her weather station while I prepared my marine sampling equipment. Sam was already exploring with his camera, capturing the way the fog rolled in from the Pacific. The locals warned us about the strange mists, about the things people saw in them. We should have listened. The first warning signs appeared in Sam's photographs that evening. The fog behaved strangely around his camera, forming shapes that weren't visible to the naked eye. Human-like figures that seemed to watch from the mist. Creatures that moved between the waves. We dismissed them as tricks of light and shadow, parental instinct making us protect him from his own imagination. The instruments told a different story. Laura's weather readings made no sense. The fog maintained impossible temperature gradients, moved against prevailing winds, and contained chemical compounds that shouldn't exist in nature. My own marine samples showed similar anomalies. Life forms adapting to conditions that defied biology. Evolutionary changes happening in real time. Something was transforming both air and sea. The locals had stopped coming to Ruby Beach months ago. The Quileute elders spoke of ancient stories, of times when the barrier between worlds grew thin. They said the fog was a sign, a warning that the old ones were stirring in the deep. We were scientists, trained to seek rational explanations, but rationality couldn't explain what our instruments were detecting. What was happening to the air and water? Sam's photos became more disturbing as we analyzed them. His natural eye for composition had captured something unnatural. Patterns in the fog that resembled ancient Quileute symbols. Shapes that suggested massive forms moving just beyond human perception. The digital images would change between viewings, as if whatever was in the fog could alter its own recorded image. Each version showed something slightly different. Something watching us through the lens. Laura's meteorological equipment began detecting impossible atmospheric conditions. The fog generated its own electromagnetic field, created weather patterns that defied physics. The moisture content shifted between readings, not evaporating or condensing but transforming into something our instruments couldn't classify. The air itself seemed to be evolving, becoming a medium for something else. My marine research revealed an ecosystem in chaos. Species were changing, developing characteristics that had no evolutionary precedent. The fish showed signs of rapid adaptation, their bodies morphing to survive in water that was becoming less like water with each passing day. The tide pools contained life forms that defied classification, creatures that seemed to flicker between different states of being. The fog started responding to our presence. It would thicken around our Arv at night, pressing against the windows like something solid. Our recordings picked up sounds that shouldn't exist. Deep vibrations that made the ocean resonate, frequencies that seemed to carry information. The barrier between air and water was dissolving, creating a new medium that could sustain things from neither element. Sam spent hours photographing the changes, his young mind more accepting of the impossible than ours. He said he could see faces in the fog, hear voices in the waves. His camera captured glimpses of what he saw. Beings that existed between states, neither solid nor gas, neither flesh nor vapor. The fog wasn't hiding them any. It was becoming them. Our third day brought phenomena we couldn't ignore. The fog developed structure, forming geometric patterns that matched ancient petroglyphs along the coast. Laura's instruments recorded it channeling energy in ways that violated thermodynamics, creating systems that seemed to bridge different physical laws. The mist wasn't just changing, it was building something, preparing our reality for what was coming through. The ocean began changing color, taking on hues that hurt to look at. My samples showed water molecules breaking down and reforming in impossible configurations, creating a liquid that wasn't quite water anymore. The marine life adapted or died. And what adapted became something new. Through Sam's lens, we could see them clearly. Hybrid creatures that swam through both water and air, their bodies flickering between states like quantum particles. Sam's connection to the phenomena grew stronger. He could sense the changes before our instruments detected them, knew where to point his camera to capture the transformations. His photos revealed a progression we were too blind to see. The gradual merging of air, water, and something else. A new medium that could sustain impossible life. Our sun was becoming a bridge, just like his camera. The Quileute warnings became clearer as we translated more of their legends. They spoke of ancient beings that existed before the separation of elements, entities that could move through air and water as one medium. The fog was their first attempt to rebuild that primordial state, to dissolve the barriers between their reality and ours. Our presence, our measurements, our documentation had given them the patterns they needed. Laura's final atmospheric readings showed what was really happening. The fog wasn't just changing our reality, it was reverting it, breaking down the fundamental forces that separated states of matter. Our instruments detected particles moving in ways quantum physics said were impossible. Energy patterns that suggested the laws of nature were being rewritten. The veil between worlds wasn't just thinning, it was being systematically dismantled. We lost Sam on the fourth day. He went out early to photograph the sunrise, saying the fog was trying to show him something. We found his camera on the beach, still recording. But Sam was gone. The footage showed him walking into mist that moved with purpose. Fog that reached for him with forms that were almost hands, almost tentacles, almost something we had no words to describe. Our sun had become part of their transformation. The photos on his camera revealed what he'd been seeing all along. The beings in the fog weren't hiding anymore. They were emerging, using the transformed air and water as a medium for their manifestation. Each image showed them more clearly. Massive forms that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Entities that moved through space like quantum particles. Unbound by classical physics, they were teaching reality to remember what it had been before elements separated. Laura's weather station recorded the final stages of atmospheric transformation. The boundary between air and water disappeared completely, creating a medium that was neither gas nor liquid but something that could sustain both states. The fog became a quantum fluid, a substance that could hold consciousness and matter in the same space. Our instruments tried to measure it and failed, showing readings that changed depending on whether we were observing them. The ocean itself began to rise, not like a tide, but like a living thing awakening. The water moved in patterns that suggested vast intelligence, forming structures that reached toward the transformed sky. My marine sensors detected life forms that existed in superposition, creatures that were both there and not there, present in multiple states until observed. The barrier between possible and impossible had dissolved with the fog. Our Arv became our last refuge, but the new reality was seeping through its seams. The air inside shifted between states, sometimes breathable, sometimes something else entirely. Through the windows we could see Sam moving through the fog, neither solid nor vapor, his form shifting between states like the ancient ones had taught him. He was learning to exist in their quantum medium, becoming something that could survive in a world without barriers. This warning may be my last chance to prevent others from making our mistake. The beings in the fog are still transforming Ruby Beach, using it as a focal point for something larger. The Quileute elders say other thin places are appearing along the coast, more veils being lifted. Our instruments and observations gave them the patterns they needed to begin breaking down reality itself. Each photograph, each measurement, each attempt to understand only accelerates their emergence. Laura's weather data has been quarantined by government agencies, but it's too late. The atmospheric changes are spreading, creating more quantum zones where classical physics breaks down. The fog appears in more places each day, teaching the air and water to remember what they were before separation. Our sun moves through these zones freely now, existing in multiple states, learning the old one's ways of being. We see him sometimes when the fog thins. Stay away from Olympic National Park. Don't try to measure the fog or photograph the changes. Every observation collapses quantum states into something closer to their reality, giving them more purchase in our world. They exist in superposition, neither here nor there until someone tries to document them. Our scientific instruments, our cameras, our attempts to understand, these are the tools they're using to reconstruct their ancient reality. The transformation continues, though few understand what they're seeing. The fog brings changes that ripple through both matter and consciousness, teaching human minds to comprehend quantum states of being. Those who stay too long begin to shift between states themselves, becoming like Sam, neither here nor there, existing in possibilities until observed. The old ones are patient, using each witness to spread their influence further. If you see fog that moves against the wind, if you notice water that seems to think, if your photos show things that change between viewings, run. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to measure it. The beings in the mist are teaching reality to remember what it was before things had to be one thing or another, when everything could exist in all states at once. They're unmaking the barriers between possible and impossible, and they're using human curiosity to do it. Sam was just the first to learn their way of being. He won't be the last.